Okay, welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Code. This is Eric. Today I'm going to be talking about the essential CSS that every developer should know. But to start off with, let's talk about why we do use CSS. Well, first of all, CSS saves us time. And as everybody knows, time is money. Therefore, CSS makes you rich. So if you're a newbie to CSS, let's talk a little bit about getting you caught up to where we need to be. First off, what is CSS? CSS typically has, or always has, a selector and declarations that are assigned to that selector. And let's talk about our different selectors. First off, we have the element. Now, an element can be anything that is an HTML tag. For example, we have our H3 tag here, and we have an assigned font size to it. Another type of selector that we can have is the ID. Now, ID is when you have an ID equals within your element, and then you can access it with a pound. So here you see we have ID equals blah, and pound blah sets a style for that element. The third kind of selector is a class. What the difference between a class element and an ID element is typically you only have one ID per page, per HTML source. However, with a class, you can have numerous, and not only that, classes are typically used along with other classes as well, as we'll get to. So you can see here we have our blah class, and you can access it either as .blah or you can do div.blah. Both of those will access this one. Nesting allows you to use multiple styles within the same node, the same element. So you can see here we have our div, which we add a style to, and then the ID, which we add a style to, and then the dot green we add a style to, and then we can also go div.green, which will append the style as well. Now the difference between div.green and just .green is that any element can use .green, but only divs can use the div.green style there. Well, there are three ways that you can include CSS in your HTML. The first one is inline styles. Now, here all you have to do is just set a style tag or a style attribute equals whatever your style might be. However, you should avoid this when possible. Next thing that you can do is an internal style sheet, and what you would do is just set a style tag at the top of your HTML in the header tag and or in the head tag, and you could set them there. Now, this typically is only used when you have a style for a single HTML page. So, again, not used very commonly. The third way to do it, and the appropriate way to do it, I think, is to have a link to a style sheet that is an external style sheet. So you see we have a link tag there which calls our external style sheet, mystyle.css, and we have a different file called mystyle.css which includes a style that would be included. Now, this is our most commonly used method, and it's typically used for sites that have multiple pages. So, all right, moving right along. Okay, now that I got your attention, we can move on into to what we actually want to talk about, which is essential CSS for the programmer. So I want to cover certain points here that I think every developer should know. Colors, borders, padding and margins, lists, fonts, backgrounds, tables, links, and floats. And we're going to cover each one of these individually, and we'll start with colors. Now, there are three different ways you can assign a color. One of them would be the color name, and I don't have a list for you of the colors, but it's all your basic colors: blue, yellow, green, red, purple, orange, white, black, those. And then you can also assign the hex value to it. So you see right here we have a green color, and then you can also assign an RGB, which is the red, green, blue, and you see this one would be red. An excellent tool that you can use to select colors, especially if you're colorblind like I am, is the Color Schemer Studio, which is a wonderful program. I highly recommend it. And these guys, it will allow you to select colors from anywhere. If you watch my other screencasts, you'll see that I use it quite a bit. So I do recommend that, but that's how the colors work. Next thing we want to talk about is borders. Now the border, you can assign a border to pretty much anything you want, any type of element. So let's say we have a div and we want to make a box. So here we have a border style, which is a solid line. The color would be D0, 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 which is kind of a light gray. And then the border width would be 2 pixels. Now, this works fine. However, there is grouping that we can apply in this. So this would actually be the way I would do it, which you pass in your border instead of all those other things. You pass in the border, and the first part of it would be the size of the border, the second part would be the style of the border, and the third part would be the color of the border. So that is how you add borders. Next thing we want to talk about is padding and margins. With the padding and margins, you see here we have a box, and the solid black line is the actual div border. So if we added a border to a box, that would be it. Border to a div, that would be it. Now, the outside spacing you see is the margin, and the inner spacing is the padding. And there you go, that's how that works. So I'm going to go through a quick example on how to do that, and here we go. Okay, as you can see here, we have an HTML file which contains simply a link tag, which includes our style sheet, and a div which has a class of box, and inside it we just have some text. So to show you what that looks like, here, let me refresh this. Here's what it looks like right here. Now we're going to just play around with it a little bit and see what we can do. First off, let's set up a style for that box. So we're going to do div.box, and within the, let me make this a little bit bigger. So within there, we're going to first set a border. So let's say border is 1 pixel solid, and it is zeros. Now, when you do add a hex value for the colors, you can basically abbreviate it to 3 if they are all of the same. So basically I can say 333 or whatnot, or you can do 345, which I think would end up being 334455. I might be wrong, but let's just for right now set this to 0, and let's make this one a little bit smaller here, and let's refresh this page, and you see we do have a box. Now, the reason that you see the border here, or this margin here, is not because of the box's margin, it's actually because of the body's margin. So if we went to our body tag and set our margin or our padding as 0, I believe what we'll get is it should hug, well, maybe not. Maybe it's the margin. There we go. So the margin of the body was set to be a little bit big there. So as you can see, we now have a box that is completely against all edges. Now you can see what we do with our margins. So if we set our margin to 25 pixels, you're going to notice that it's going to come into the page. So these are actually 25 pixels this way and 25 pixels this way, and you don't see it, but there's 25 pixels here as well. So if I was to shrink this up, I guess you can't do that with this, but there is 25 pixels each way. Now if I wanted to set a margin which is just for one side, so let's say margin left, we want that to be 10 pixels. Let's go back here and refresh, and you notice that all of our pixels are still 25. Margin is, except for right here, which is 10. Now there is a shortcut that you can do this if you want to, where you can say we have 25 pixels on the top, we're going to have 25 pixels on the right, 25 pixels on the bottom, and 10 pixels on the left. Now if I was to refresh that, it looks exactly the same, but it always goes in that order. So top, right, bottom, left. It makes a big circle. Alright, so let's take a look at our padding. So padding we're going to set to 25 pixels as well, and right now you can see we have 0 padding. Hit refresh, and now you see that we do have this great big padding here. That's 25 pixels within the box. So padding is inside, margin is outside. And of course we can do the padding where, let's say, we have 15, 25 pixels, 0 pixels, and 10 pixels. So we're going to have kind of padding all over the place. See we have 25 or 15 on the top, 25 on the right, 0, and 10 on the left there. So that really explains how our margin and our paddings work. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about are lists. Now, lists are a pretty in-depth topic that you can get into, because with lists you can create your menu systems, you can create tab systems, you can create reordering elements. So there's quite a bit you can do with the list, but I want to talk about just a few things that a few different CSS styles that we can add to them. The first one is the list style type, and here you can have circle, square, you can have disk, which is a filled in circle, a few other things, and I'll get to that in a second. You can add an image to it, so if you wanted to have your own image instead of one of the preset ones, you can use that. And then there's also the position, which is inside or outside. However, as I showed you before, we do have a shortcut for this. So here you can see we have list style. Instead of adding all those three things, you can just group them all together. So here we have a circle that's inside, and we use our blue dot. Now, there are two types of lists. There is a UL, which is an unordered list, and an OL, which is an ordered list. Now, an unordered list doesn't matter what order it's in. An ordered list would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, whatever you have there. So you can see we have our different list style types, and 4 of them, the first 4, can be used interchangeably between the OL and the UL. The 5th, 6th, and 7th are only for OLs. So you can see how that works. And let's go ahead and create an example on how you might want to add a navigation to a site. All right, now we're back to our example that we had before, and we want to add a navigation to this. So what we would do is we would set up an unordered list, and within each one we might have a link, which could go anywhere, but let's say first, and then we're going to have second and third. So second and third, and if you look, this initially looks just like your typical list, but we want to add some style to it. So let's call this one our navigation UL, and let's go over and modify our style. So here we would use the pound navigation. And what that would do is it would set the styles for that specific ID. First thing we can do is say list style is none, and when we do that, you'll notice that our dots go away. The second thing we want to do is set our margin to 0, and you'll see that when we do that, well, maybe it's not the margin, maybe it's the padding. I'm going to set both to 0 because we don't want our UL to have any dictation as far as our padding and our margin. So here you have that. The second thing we're going to do is add another style for the list items that belong to that navigation UL. So here I'm going to put something that we're going to talk about soon, which is floating. I'm going to say float left. Now I'm going to add a border as well, to this so you could see what's going on. So if I refresh this, you're going to see that the first, second, and third, they're all there. They each have a border. Let's get rid of this so that we can see it a little bit more clearly. See, we have first, second, and third. Well, that's not quite how we want it to look. So we're going to set a padding on this, and we're going to set the top padding, or the top and bottom padding, to 3 pixels, and the left and right padding to 8 pixels. Now, when you see, normally how I showed you before is you have these 4 things. Well, what you could do is if you had them to where you know the top and bottom are going to be the same and the left and right are going to be the same, then you would set the first one, which would be the top and bottom, and the second one, which would be the right and left. If I refresh this, you'll see that it does have 3 on the top and 8 on each side. So we're getting a little closer. Alright, now let's take off our border, and let's do this to where we set all links within the navigation so that they have no text decoration. So if we do that, we go back here and refresh, you'll see that we don't have any underline under these links. So we're getting very close here. The next thing we want to do is add a border on the right side. Now if we do a border right, and let's say it's kind of a light gray, you notice that we have these lines right here, which is great. However, the thing that we don't want is to have that last one. So actually I'm going to say border left, and on the navigation I'm going to say if we are the first, then I'm going to say border left is 0 pixels. So that will remove our border on the left for the first one. And what we need to do is set a class here saying that's our first. So you see it's going to look for the li with a class name of first, and we hit refresh, and now it looks pretty dang good. So let's just add some padding on our body here so that we do see what's going on. So I'm going to add 25 pixels just to kind of bring it in there. So there we go. We have our first, second, and our third navigation. And that is how you would quickly create a navigation using floats and ULs and LIs. Now there's one more thing that I would do, and I will get to this. I want to add a new class style called clear, and on this I want to set clear to both. What you'll see here is if I have blah blah blah, and if I refresh this, because it's floating to the left and we don't have any clear saying okay, well, stop floating and put everything below this, whatever follows is just going to be tacked on to the right of it. So if we were to add a clear here where we say class equals clear, and what that would do is that would use this clear both style, and you'll see that it does put it right below there. So that is very important. Whenever you use floats, you do want to use your clear. Okay, now we're going to talk about the fonts. Now there are 2 different types of font categories. There is a serif category and a sans serif category. Now the serif categories include Times New Roman, Times, Serif. They're the ones that look a little bit fancier with the curvy edges and whatnot. And then the sans serif fonts are Arial, Helvetica, sans serif of course, and you see that they are very blockish. Now I'm going to show you different font families that we can use for each of those categories. Now these are all web safe fonts, and so what you want to do is in your style you'd say font dash family, and you would pass in this value. So the font dash family is what you'd use. These are the different serif fonts you can use, and there's an example of how they look. Here are some different sans serif fonts that you can use. And here are a third category, which is not typically used, maybe only when showing code. These are monospaced, so these are the ones that have the same spacing between each character, so that you always so they line up vertically. It looks great when you're programming stuff like that. So it should be noted though that the sans serif fonts are the easiest to read on browsers. So most of what I do always uses sans serif fonts. Sometimes I use serif fonts when I'm showing a quote or something like that might want to make it look a little bit more personable. So let's also talk about some different stuff that you can use with your fonts. So we do have a font style, which includes normal, italic, and oblique. Then we have our font sizes. Now the font size is interesting because, well, here we show that we're using our pixel sizes. So those are the actual pixels that it shows up. Now this is for Firefox and for Safari. Typically we don't want to use that. What we want to use is what they call EMs. Now EMs is what the W3 recommends. What it is it here, let me actually move along here. What it is it is one EM is equal to 16 pixels, and so basically 40 pixels for the H1 would actually turn out to be 2.5 EM because it's divided by 16 equals 2.5. So the reason that we need this is because of our friend Bill Gates. Our Microsoft Internet Explorer, when you resize a page, it doesn't work properly with pixels. So this is basically, the EMs are used to make sure that we are still working well with our Internet Explorer users, which of course are still the majority. Okay, next thing we want to talk about is our font weight. There are a whole bunch of different types of font weights that you can use. The font weight would be bold, lighter, normal. There's also numeric values like 100, 200, 300. So you can use those to set your weight. Typically the only one I use is normal and bold. But if there's something that I want you to walk away with on this as far as fonts go, is use EM, not PX. So use your EMs, people. Alright, moving along, we're going to talk about our backgrounds, and I'm just going to really briefly go over this. Backgrounds typically happen in body tags or div tags or some type of container. You can set your background color, and that uses our typical color, whether it could be a text or the name of the color, the hex, or the RGB. You can set a background image. And you can also set the repeat. So if you want it to repeat horizontally, you would set repeat X. If you want it to repeat vertically, you would set repeat Y. Or if you just want it to repeat like tile, then you would just say repeat. But of course there is a shortcut to this, and the shortcut would be where you just set the background, and then first you set the background color, and then you can pass in the URL and the repeat X, Y, whatever you want to repeat. And additionally, after that, you can set the top and left position if you wanted to set positioning, but I'm not going to get into that. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is tables. And a table is, as you know, well, that's what a table is. Everybody knows what a table is. So a table consists of table header or T-head tag, which includes a bunch of TRs, which are table rows, which include a bunch of THs, which is a bunch of table header tags. These are cells. The THs are cells. So you can actually add style to the T-head, you can add style to the TR, or to the individual THs. In the body, the T body includes all of your TDs, all of your rows that actually contain the content. And the T body contains a bunch of TRs. And the TRs, of course, contain a bunch of TDs, which is our table data. Those are our cells. So here might be what a grid CSS would look like. So you have your table and you assign a class to it, which is grid, it would have 1 pixel black, 1 solid black border. The border collapse is actually really cool because if you've ever had it where your table seems to have spacing between your borders and it's just kind of a pain, you want it to just look like my example here where it has 1 border throughout. You set your border collapse to collapse, and then you can set your width to a pixel amount or percentage. And you see I have table.grid th, and here I'm setting the th style of all the ths that belong to the table.grid. I'm aligning them to the center. I'm setting the background color to a darker color and the foreground color to a white. And then you see I have tr.odd td at the bottom. And here I'm going to say for every odd row, for each of the table data that belong to every odd row, I want to set the background color to an off-white or a gray. So as you can see, that's what we have right there. Okay, next we're going to talk about links. Links are pretty easy. There are some certain tags that you can append to a link. Now, a link, of course, is an A tag, which is I believe it's an anchor tag. So on an example, you would have an A href equals into some link, and then you could say style equals or class equals. Or in this case, you wouldn't need to do anything at all. What this does, if you see the A : link, that means that this is a typical link that we want to use. So it wouldn't style an anchor tag, for example, but if there's a link there, it would work. And here we set the color to red and the text decoration to none. So the link actually has no underline. Also, you can set the visited links to look differently. And the hover, which is actually very important to know. If you put any element and you set a style with :hover, that means every time your mouse goes over it, it will implement this style, and every time your mouse leaves it, it will remove that style. So here we add a hover, which we set our color to purple, our text decoration to underline, and our background color to yellow. And also you can set active links that are basically the ones that I believe, in my understanding, they're the ones that we're working with right now, we're looking at right now. And so that one, you change the color and the text decoration as well. So commonly what I do is I don't really worry about anything but the hover. So in the hover, I would set text decoration to underline, and the regular A I would just set to text decoration of none. Okay, finally we want to talk about our floats. Now, floats are very fun, but they're a little bit more complex. They don't look complex right here, but I'm going to show you why I feel they are a little bit more complex. You see we have a pound left, which I would just assign a div with an ID equals left here, and that would be on my left container. Pound right is my right container. So I would say div ID equals right. And you see we have float left and float right along with widths. And then at the last one, you see typically when you use floats, you always want to use a clear as well. So I have a dot clear. So I'm going to use, it uses clear both. And what that does is it basically chops off the bottom and makes it so that you start fresh. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the screencast. This did take a little bit longer to put together because it was mostly slides, as you can see, so it was a little bit more editing involved than normal. Anyway, here are some resources that I wanted to provide you, and also some books that I do own through SitePoint. Very good books on CSS and web design, so definitely take a look and check them out. This screencast is sponsored by Jumpstart Lab. Jumpstart Lab offers private and corporate training in Ruby, Rails, and related technologies. They're experienced educators, not just good developers, and will get you going quickly. Courses can be scheduled in the U.S. or around the world, and curriculum customized to meet your needs. Learn more at jumpstartlab.com. This screencast is also sponsored by SitePoint, who provide excellent resources on web design, CSS, and also they do offer screencasts. And right now they're giving away 2 free copies of Fancy Form Design if you tweet Learn CSS with SitePoint and Teach Me to Code. You better hurry, there's only 2 copies to give away, so tweet the message Learn CSS with SitePoint and Teach Me to Code.
That was wonderful.
Bravo!
I loved that.
Oh, it was great.
Well, it was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't bad.
Well, there were parts of it that weren't very good, though.
It could have been a lot better.
I didn't really like it.
It was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was awful.
It was terrible.
Get him away!
Hey, boo!
Boo!